Well, welcome to the program, Anshul. It's been a while in coming, but I'm really looking forward to chatting.
Thanks a lot, Simon. Glad we could make it work. Sorry it's taken us so long.
Absolutely fine. So I always ask with, how did you come to Treasury and what made you choose Treasury as your career, Anshul?
So interestingly for me, the migration to Treasury was a coincidence. I was in banking for almost a decade, and got to a point in my life where I thought I was done with banking, wanted to do something different. And one of my clients, Bechtel, was looking to fill an assistant treasurer role. And that was an excellent opportunity for me, global organization. I knew the sector well. I knew the management team well as well. And to me, that was an opportunity to learn treasury, actually. It would be hard to believe that I went in an assistant treasurer role, not actually knowing much about treasury. And that was an interesting transition for me, coming from corporate finance to going into operational treasury. So for me, the first lesson I learned when I got in there was I had to learn to say I don't know and I need help. Because it was critical for me to ask for that and to depend on my teammates who are willing to train me, because I was not a treasury professional when I got in there.
So interestingly, Anshul, the podcast that released today for me was with Joaquin Wettermark, who's the treasurer at Salesforce, and he has a similar background to you. And he said it took him a good 2 to 3 years to really get his head around the corporate treasury after being on the sales side in banking. And he said he went through waves where he thought he'd made a mistake, but eventually he came through, and now he loves it. But that transition from banking in a sales-orientated, month-to-month delivery type role is very different to corporate treasury, isn't it?
It's kind of interesting. I can completely relate to that experience. Look, banking is an awesome experience. It's a platform that's actually influenced how I work as a treasurer today because of the experiences I got, seeing a lot of CFOs and treasurers and how they acted, through the financial crisis and beyond. But it's definitely different. The mindset that you come in from banking is very, very transaction oriented. Your instant gratification comes from doing deals. You're looking for those quick early wins, and that's not what treasury is about. Treasury is about it's about owning the process, right? You have to live with your actions and the outcomes of those for a long time to come, versus in a transactional environment where you do it and you move on. And it was very challenging. I'd say it took me a good 18 to 24 months to get out of the transactional mindset, to appreciate the complexities and the nuances of treasury and what it takes to become an effective treasury professional. It's so much broader than just capital markets, just corporate finance. And it's so much broader than just the operational side of treasury, which is moving money around. And the only way to do that is you gotta hunker down, you gotta ask for help, and then you gotta be a student. And for 6 months into that job, I was not behaving like a student. And very quickly I learned that just because I have a title doesn't entitle me. And I had to transform my mindset into becoming a student and being willing to learn. And that's what helped me, over the next 2.5 years of being at Bechtel, to become a much more effective treasury professional.
And I would imagine you had some really good support, though, from the treasurer and the treasury team at Bechtel, because, again, going back to Joaquin, he said that was the key, that was what got him through, having a patient team around him that could teach him.
Absolutely. If you think about going into an organization where you are sort of an unknown commodity, not very knowledgeable about the core treasury function, the only way for you to succeed was having the sponsorship from management and having the support from the team. And Bechtel is probably one of the best treasury organizations that were out there. I had the fortune to overlap with the assistant treasurer there, who was able to mentor me and teach me about treasury. And then I had a very solid team who was willing to educate me and help me understand how treasury works. And that was very critical to me evolving as a professional. And it was also very humbling and to learn how much I did not know.
And what was it in particular? I know banking obviously very transactional, very deal orientated. What in particular was the challenge moving on to the corporate side?
The biggest challenge on moving on to the corporate side was patience, right? In banking, because you're transactional, there's a tendency to be impatient because you want to move on. So that makes it really, really hard. And in treasury, like I said, you don't get instant gratification. There are so many different aspects that you have to take into account that will be impacted by your actions within treasury, be it setting up a corporate architecture, be it moving money, be it, being a strategic partner on transactions. It's not a very, very siloed approach to getting something done. And that breadth of touch points that you need to develop and you need to be thinking about before you take actions is probably the biggest challenge.
What advice would you give to other bankers then that are looking at making that move into the corporate side?
So, as I thought about moving out of banking, I followed a very simple philosophy, which is to not regret your exit out of banking. You want to work for a company and for individuals that motivate you and challenge you. So it's not about just quitting banking and going to any company. Because of the challenge of migrating from the transactional to the operational mindset. And the culture in banking is also very different, right, than corporates. So that transition can be very, very difficult. So to me, when you're looking at opportunities, think about looking for companies and leaders to whom you can add value, and those in turn can help you learn and become a better person and professional, right? I would also say, one of the things that people get hung up on coming out of banking is title and compensation, right? What I tell them is worry about getting the experience. The best thing I heard when I was leaving banking was you're going to get paid to learn. And that's a very good position to be in. So, don't get me wrong, compensation is important, but as I've grown, I've realized that's a byproduct of an experience. It should not be a goal, right? So, going with the mindset that you're going in for the experience that's going to round you up as a better finance professional. That may mean you got to take a step back from a title and a compensation standpoint, but nobody's career is going to go in one direction. That one step back allows you to open up so many other opportunities that would have never been available to you had you stuck onto one career line.
I love that advice, Anshul. I could not have said it better myself. It's one of those questions that I have to ask bankers all the time is, are you ready? Do you genuinely want to make this move? Because it's going to be a backward step comp-wise, and you've got to be ready for that. And if you're not, then it's not the right move for you. So you've put it very eloquently there.
Right. And the other thing I would say that when you come out of banking, and like I said, it took me some time to learn, but once I learned, it was very valuable. That, when you come out of that environment and go into a corporate environment, your ability to have an impact is so directly correlated to humility and desire to learn, right? So coming out of banking, the intent has always been that I need to understand everything. I need to know everything when I go in front of my client. But coming into a corporate, humility and desire to learn becomes a huge set of tools in your arsenal.
Anshul, I'm just going to go back for the listeners and just, so from a career perspective, you started with Fidelity, You moved to Bank of America where you were for 8.5 years. You then, as you just mentioned, jumped out of banking to an assistant treasurer role with Bechtel for 5.5 years. And then the last 2 years, you've been the treasurer with Varian Medical Systems.
Right.
What would you say have been your career highlights in your own mind at this point?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, when you think about in the early part of my career, when I used to talk about my achievements, it was so much around projects and deals and tasks. And as I sit here today and I think about what my achievements are that satisfy me the most, they're not projects, they're not deals. Those aren't the things that make me proud. They're all centered around people. And so when I look at Varian as an example, what makes me proud at Varian in the first 2 years of being here, I'm really proud of the work we've done to build a culture within Treasury, to foster leadership, to foster ownership, to create an environment for growth and risk-taking among my team members. And what that's translated into is I've got a phenomenal bench of talent now that's so broad in their skill set that I've almost become dispensable in a span of 2 years. The team could function without me and function at the highest, most caliber, right? So, while we're still evolving, that culture has allowed us to make so much transformation and build this talent bench, right? And that's what makes me proud, is I've got a bunch of people who now are very passionate about what they do, are continuing to grow, and could have a very successful career within Varian or walk out of Varian and take treasurer type roles in other organizations. So it's really satisfying to see people that you've invested in succeed. And to me, I would say that's what I feel very passionate about now.
And you've just touched on a really important point for me, Anshul. Like being a really good leader and a good manager, and in our world, obviously, then making you a good treasurer. Consistently, the people that are the best managers just say exactly what you just said. Then it's about their people and not about them. It's amazing how many of the stars out there that I've interviewed as treasurers over the last 2.5 years who have that response that you've just given, and they are always the high achievers. It's uncanny that everyone thinks the same way. So yeah, that very well put, and you've obviously evolved from that banking side to be a real true leader in the corporate treasury space, which is amazing.
No, one of the best advice is, and again, I have a lot of mentors in my life. When I was in banking, the best advice I got was, if you think about yourself, there's one person thinking about you. If you think about everybody else, there's a lot more than one person thinking about you. And the ones that will succeed in life will be the ones that have a lot of people thinking about them.
They're the ones who fly, aren't they? They're the ones who really go places as opposed to just do well.
Exactly. So to me, that's stuck in my head always. And it's, look, at the end of the day, the technical experiences, Simon, can be learned, right? It's the people side that differentiates the talent, if you may. And even when we look at people, and I look for talent that I want to bring into Treasury, or experiences that I want to give Treasury, what I look for is not people who have Treasury experience. I look for people that have the attitude. It's all about people who are hungry, people that want to learn. You can teach people Treasury over time. It's something that you can get with experience, and you'll get better over time. But to me, getting those self-motivated, hardworking, inquisitive people, those are the traits that will turn people into successes, right? Because in an environment that's so dynamic, it's those self-motivated people that will be incented to drive for innovation and change, right? And that'll take the organization to a whole new level. And that's why I focus so much on people within my own team, and grooming them and helping them grow.
And I think the other key thing there, Anshul, is that you back yourself as a manager to train and develop those people to let them fly. Because if you take those really high achievers and then you add in a good manager who equips them, which is what you mentioned in your earlier And so they're the ones who really do well. And the soft skills get them there, but the training and the development of a good leader is what makes them fly.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Is there anything like working between a Bechtel and a Varian? Have you noticed a difference in the way that Treasury operates between those industries?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? And I've been very fortunate to have worked for two industry leaders in their own space. Bechtel on the construction side, and with Varian, it's just so satisfying experience. Not just because of the work I'm doing, but the mission of the company that I work for, right? And that's what ties all the employees at Varian together, because that's a very powerful mission. Now, when you think about Treasury, the good part about Treasury is that the underlying skill set is industry agnostic, right? It's you can transition that easily. But the biggest challenge that you face when you change industries is the business operations and the trends across industries can be drastically different. So to be effective in a role in a new industry, the last thing you want to do is come in with preconceived agenda for change, because it may not fit the exact same way it fit in your prior experiences. So it is extremely important for me and for anybody else who's doing this is to identify partners when they come in to learn about the business, to learn about the drivers, to learn about the trends, so that you can then be positioned to help develop Treasury actions and then develop the infrastructure that aligns and supports the long-term objectives of that company. And again, as I go back to mentors, another advice I got when I came to Varian was, look, we've been here for several years before you came. We're going to be here for several years after you go. So you want to listen, learn, respect, and then build on the strengths of the organization, right? And to me, the biggest piece of that transition was not coming in and trying to make a name for myself as a change agent, but coming in and trying to build a reputation of being a partner who's willing to learn and is willing to build an architecture that can support the overall objectives of the company. And that's really hard. When people change industries is you don't take time to pause to learn.
I totally agree with that, actually. That's really good. What then do you think makes a successful treasurer in the eyes of the CFO, the CEO, and the board, Anshul?
That's kind of interesting. And as I look at all the treasurers and CFOs that I've interacted with over my career, the biggest differentiator for the good ones from is that they're the trusted advisor. And winning that trust is very, very critical for you to be successful in your job. And the ones that have done that have actually done that because they've balanced between being viewed as a subject matter expert, but also have been willing to be coached, right? So you don't want to be the guy who has all the responses all the time, but you're willing to listen and you're willing to pivot and make changes to your strategies. To me, the other trait that the best treasurers I've seen have are the ones who've transformed the treasurer's role from being sort of a manager of cash and liquidity, which again is very core to treasury. That's like the cornerstone of what treasurers need to do. But now to having a seat at the table, with the business leaders within the organization and are driving strategic and operational decisions that go beyond just the impact on treasury, but align the treasury actions to drive global success of those actions. And for me to be successful in treasury, like we talked about earlier, you want to be a leader that understands the business, that can support the growth and objectives, right? And the ones that are able to do that, they're almost functioning at the CFO level. They're the guys that the CEO can go to and know that they will get good, consistent advice like they would have if there was no CFO.
And it also comes back to what we were talking about before around the treasurer role getting other things, like you've got investor relations now, insurance, that a lot of these roles now are, like you say, becoming mini CFOs with all the commercial side of the business.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right. The treasurer role is definitely evolving now, and it varies by companies, but you're starting to see that becoming a lot more of a pivotal role that is grooming future finance leaders as well.
Definitely. Well, now you've made it to the treasurer role, Anshul. You've had a few years under your belt. If you were chatting to yourself at 25 and starting your career journey again, what's the thing that you know now that you wish you had known back then?
The first thing I would do is probably pace myself. When you're doing when you start your career, there's a lot of hunger to grow and grow fast. But when you look at a 40-year career, 1 year does not make a big difference in there. So I would say I would have paced myself better. I would have still started in banking just because the breadth of experience you get there is significant, right? And it's very insightful to see what other companies and other treasurers do. And the one thing I also would do differently is, and I have not done that yet within my treasury experience, was go to the business, right? I think to be an effective treasury professional and eventually a treasurer, that is extremely important. You want to understand the business. It may be really hard when you're in treasury to think, why being part of a business would help you experience in treasury. Why would I want to go do, commercial contracts, or why would I want to go do FP&A, or why would I want to go do accounting on the business side? But it allows you to understand the drivers of the business. It allows you to then start making decisions with that broader perspective in mind, right? It allows you to bridge the business and the positions you have much better and influence the strategic direction of finance. So I can tell you, had I been given that opportunity earlier on in my treasury career, I would probably have been a better treasury professional. Now, I did have those opportunities, and I was not mature enough to think of things the way I do today. But if I had to go back, I would probably take one of those opportunities to get that experience.
It's easy in hindsight, though, isn't it, Anshul? Like when you're running as fast as you can because you're trying to get there sooner. It's hard to see how that diversion is going to get you there quicker. But with the benefit of time and experience, you realise that it actually would have been valuable.
No, absolutely. It would have, in hindsight, it would have actually accelerated my personal and professional growth had I taken that detour. And that was something I could not visualize at that point in time.
Which is understandable. You don't have all the answers. You're making it up as you go along. And it's easy to look back with 20/20 vision, isn't it, and say, yep, I should have. But it's good advice to those out there that you do look back at that and think it was an opportunity potentially missed.
Yep.
What about networking, Anshul? How have you approached networking throughout your career, and what advice do you have for the listeners around that?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think I'm pretty good at keeping relationships, but I'm pretty bad at networking. And it's something that I need to focus on. It's very easy for me to, or anybody to, as a matter of fact, to say there's not enough time in the day to network. But as I've now settled myself into this treasurer role at Varian, I've tried to do my best to do an outreach to my peers within the industry and outside the industry. And what I've learned is, look, I've always known, treasury is nothing proprietary, right? And if you're trying to solve a problem, look around. Somebody's either solved it already or is doing it better than you are. And I've realized that by networking, one, how open people are to help you and educate you, and how much better it allows you to function and develop and actually accelerate your own actions within the organization, right? And beyond that, it just helps you understand, what are other people thinking? What are other ideas that are out there, right? Because you're looking at it from a very narrow lens of your organization and what you want to drive. and you're not looking at all the other innovation and fun stuff that's going on outside. So to me, I think I have a long way to go in networking. I'd probably say I do 10% of what I should be doing, but there's room to go. And I try every time to do this better and better, and hopefully I'll continue to do that in a more focused way versus on a need-only basis. And I would say, as people look at opportunities, people look at ideas, people look at implementations, executions. There is no better way than to look around you and see what other people have done, learn from their mistakes, or learn from what they've done and see how you can improve on it.
Technology is changing, and you talk about innovation there. How do you see the treasurer role changing in the foreseeable future?
That's an interesting one. Hopefully I'll have a job by the time it's changed. But you look at Treasury over the last decade, and more so in the last half a decade, the innovation that's gone on the Treasury front is phenomenal. From a technology perspective, there are so many things that were routine to Treasury that are now becoming automated. What that's going to allow us to do is that's going to allow us to look at how do we strategically realign Treasury, right? Giving up the operational side can be a very uncomfortable feeling because that's what you've always thought Treasury is. But to me, it will free up resources to look at how do we optimize the organization beyond Treasury, right? It gives you the resources to think beyond just the operational side of Treasury. And I do think that over the next 5 years, a lot more of Treasury operations is going to get automated. It's going to be less and less humans doing a lot of the payments, reconciliations, receivables, funds flow, potentially even investments. A lot of that stuff is going to get automated. And the enhancement for that time will be around how do we think about Treasury strategically more and more and more, right? It's all about being that valued partner beyond being an operational player. And to me, that's going to happen. To me, that is something that excites me because it allows us all to think about how we will, I guess, innovate as individuals and evolve as professionals.
But it's also the fun stuff in Treasury, Anshul, the business partnering and the strategic side.
And that's what I was implying, right? Once you give up some of the operational stuff on the automation, your ability to free up your mind to focus on driving strategic growth within the organization, using your Treasury mindset from a risk, compliance, execution perspective can be a very valuable asset to the broader organization, because those skills transcend across functions, but they are so critical and ingrained within the Treasury world that that's a big advantage for you when you get out of Treasury.
Definitely. No, I totally agree. Anshul, it's been really enjoyable chatting to you today. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to working with you moving forward.
Thanks a lot, Simon, for the opportunity, and look forward to meeting you again in person once we get through COVID.
Hello and welcome to the Treasury Talent Podcast. I'm your host, Simon Lynch. Today I'm joined by Anshul Maheshwari, who is the Treasurer at Varian Medical Systems. I met Anshul when I was in California back in late 2019. And the minute I met him, I said, I want this guy on my podcast. He's one of those rare guys who, he's a star, he's humble, he's a really impressive guy to meet, and you'll hear that in some of his answers today. I really enjoyed podcasting with him, and I hope you really enjoy it too.